Hi, hello, and welcome to another Assemble This video. Today's cards are all about these delightful little mushrooms and some easy watercoloring anyone can do with water reactive inks. Plus, I have two fun layouts to assemble these watercolor images into cards. It's lots of fun with die cutting and layering of pattern paper to create two really adorable cards. I'm featuring the August 2022 Never Stop Growing Sentiment Kit from Unity Stamp Company. I just love the wonderful trio of mushrooms in this set, plus there's so many inspiring and encouraging sentiments in this kit. I've gathered our basic supplies and I have some watercolor paper, pattern paper, 3 colors of distress ink, and some paintbrushes. I also pulled out some blending brushes but ended up not using them, so surprise, you don't really need to use those. I pre-stamped my mushrooms and any sentiments I'm using on that watercolor paper using watercolor friendly ink. I like to use VersaFine, either the original formula or the Claire formula. And then I have a mixed media mat from Waffle Flower that I'm just mushing on some of my distress ink colors. And the 3 colors that I'm using are Evergreen Bow, Fossilized Amber, and Fire Brick. I chose these colors because they do match my pattern papers, so that would be something you want to think about for your cards is the colors that are in your pattern papers and what would match that the best. I'm beginning by watercoloring my background. I'm picking up some water with my paintbrush. It's a nice big, thick, fluffy paintbrush that I just got off of Amazon. It's not even anything special. And I'm just painting water around my mushroom image and in the background. And then I'm going to pick up just a little bit more water and some of the pigment from the Evergreen Bow. And then I'm just going to tap that into the water I've already placed on my paper. And what's nice about this, what's considered a wet on wet technique, is that when you place that ink into the wet paper, it just automatically starts to blend and move on its own. So you just need to tap it in there and let it do its thing. You might have to spread it around just a little bit, but it'll just kind of spread and start to fill in where the water was that you had placed it. Kind of creates a boundary for it to move and spread out in. And you can just keep tapping on more and more color. I like to start lighter and then to build up. So I get a nice soft halo of a sky behind our trio of mushrooms. And that ends the background. Super easy. Anybody can do this. What I would recommend at this point is to go ahead and dry that background. I forgot to do that and I just started to move on to my mushrooms, and you'll start to see that my mushroom color will start to bleed into that background. So instead of doing what I did, go ahead and get out your heat tool and just kind of dry that background a little bit. That'll minimize the blue of pulling in the yellow from the stems of the mushroom. So next I am coloring the stems of the mushroom and using that fossilized amber. And I'm using a lot of ink and a lot less water. And so the stems are pretty vibrant, and I'm just tapping that on, just kind of filling in that area. And then to get a lighter color of that yellow, I grabbed some water, grabbed just a little bit of that ink, and then kind of tapped it off to the side and blended it with a bunch of water. And that'll lighten up that yellow tone. So really I get 2 tones of yellow that are very similar that will go well together, but I have a lighter shade and then a darker shade. And then next I'm just going in and tapping on a little bit more of the fossilized amber over the top, kind of create a mottled effect of the stems so I get a variation of color. Now you could go one step further and maybe pull in maybe a little bit of a brown or an orange or something else to those stems if you wanted to go a little bit more involved in your watercoloring, but this is so simple and it's really pretty, so I'm just sticking with 3 colors, and the watercolor itself creates such a variation on the paper and the way that the ink pools in the water that you put down that it just creates enough interest for me. So now I moved on to the tops of the mushrooms, and I'm using that fired brick. And I did a light wash first, and then now I'm tapping on a more intense saturation of that color on top. So there's less water on my paintbrush, and I'm just tapping that on top so it kind of pools and creates a different level of intensity over the previous wash. Just gives a little bit more interest to the paint color, since I am only using one color for both my dark and light tone. And it's super easy to do, and if you just let it kind of sit and do its thing and dry a little bit, and you can always come back in and add another layer of color over the top if you want to deepen it. Watercolors are fun that way. You can always add, you can take away a little bit of color by adding water and then picking it up maybe with your paper towel. But it's easier to go lighter and then to add more color rather than trying to take it away. And it may not be what's in nature, but I thought I'd bring that red down into the stem of the mushroom just because I thought there was a lot of yellow going on. So that's why I ended up doing that. And now the background did bleed a little bit. You can see how the yellow bled into the blue. So definitely dry your background before you move on. And then I just used my towel to kind of pick it up and to get rid of some of that yellow that went into the blue. And then I did go back in and add a little bit of blue on top. For my second card, I colored everything the same, but this time I did the background last. I made sure those mushrooms were nice and dry, and then I went in and did my wet on wet technique to create the evergreen bough background. I just created my water border, and then I'm just tapping in that pretty bluish green color to create my background. And then this method actually worked much better, so they didn't blend together. And that finishes off the watercoloring with just 3 colors. We got this really pretty watercolored trio of mushrooms that are going to be perfect for our cards. So let's assemble card number 1. I have this ornament banner die from Pink Fresh Studio that I just love, and I die cut out my trio of mushrooms with that. And then I also die cut a piece of pattern paper that I thought was really pretty, and I'm just going to layer that over each other onto my card front, which is a craft card base. And then I have this little piece of yellow pattern paper that I'm just going to trim or die cut down the bottom and create like a little topper for my center tag. And then I'm just going to trim that down a little bit so there's a definition between the different layers. I didn't want it to go all the way across the top. I like the way that it just kind of centered in the middle of that tag. And then I'm just going to glue that down straight onto the front of that. And then once that's in place, I'll just trim off the top so it's level with the top of that ornament banner. To add a bit of interest and texture to this card, I'm going to use my tiny little hole punch and punch 2 little holes at the top of this banner. And I'm just eyeballing it, but if you don't feel comfortable with that, just pull out a ruler. And then I'm going to thread in some burlap string and tie it in a bow. This is some May Arts burlap string in natural, I believe, and I just tied a nice big bow in the holes that I punched. And then for some fun, I pulled out a stamp set called Sending a Happy Hello, and it has this tiny little happy birthday sentiment in it that I love. And I thought I'd turn these little mushrooms into a birthday card. So I'm just stamping over the top, happy birthday over and over again, just in different random places. It doesn't even matter if it stamps perfectly. I like the vintage look of that, and it just kind of turns those mushrooms into a birthday card now. Next, I'm just layering everything up. I glued that bottom banner down to my card front, and then I popped up my center mushroom panel. I grabbed that same sentiment, the happy birthday, from the Sending a Happy Hello kit, and I stamped that on some watercolor paper just so it would match, trimmed it down into a strip, and then I'm just going to notch out the end so I create a little banner. And I like the way that this sentiment is mimicking the ones that I stamped into the background. And then I just pop that up on the front. And that was card number 1. Let's move to card number 2. I'm doing some more die cutting, this time with a different Pinkfresh Studio die. This is the diagonal stitched rectangles. I die cut out my 2 pattern pieces of paper, and then I turn that die sideways to die cut out my mushroom panel. That's a fun way to get a different use out of your rectangular dies. Next, I'm just going to layer my pattern papers onto my card front, which is a craft card base again, and then just lift up the edges. So I'm only adding glue to the center of that panel, so I get a little bit of lift around the edge. Just creates a subtle little interest and different layer to the card. Next, I'm wrapping some more of that burlap string around my card, and I'm just going to tie a bow up at the top. I want it positioned so I can put my mushroom panel right below it, so I'm just going to finagle that up so my knot is just right above where I want my panel to be. And once it's in place, I just tie a little tiny bow. And then I'll trim off the tails. I prefer a side fold card, so when I tie bows like this that go from the top to the bottom, I'll do that around my layers, and then I glue all of that to my card front, which I just did. Next, I'm going to add some foam adhesive to the back of my panel, and fudge, I just cut into my bow. Gosh darn it, I don't think I've ever done that. I just cut my bow in half. Well, that's a bummer. That's okay. I have an idea. We'll fix it. So I just cut all of that off. And then I'm just going to tie a multi-loop bow around my fingers. And if you're interested in how I do that, I'll link to a video up in the corner to a previous video of me tying bows. And I'll just create a multi-loop bow like this and then trim off the tails from that knot, and then we'll use some glue instead. And I'll just glue it in place, and nobody will be the wiser except me and my whoopsies. So funny. I can't believe I did that. So I'm just adding some glue, putting my bow over the top, and then I'll put a little block on top just so it sets in place and doesn't move and gives the glue some time to adhere. And I'll finish adding some foam adhesive to the back of my panel, way over here, away from my bow, so I don't end up cutting that again. And now I'm just going to slide this in and under that bow. It's not really dry yet, but that's okay. It's almost there. So I'm just going to put it in place, kind of finagle it into the position that I want it, and then now I'm going to put that block on top and just give it plenty of time to dry. And then to finish everything off, I'll just glue down some clear droplets with some glossy accents. And here are our finished cards. I'm loving the look of the watercolor for these mushrooms. I picked out the colors from the pattern paper so they match wonderfully. The layers of the die cuts, the repeat stamping of the birthday sentiment, and the bow are just simple little touches to make this card super unique. And to switch up the layout, I have another card with some blocky layers of pattern paper behind the mushrooms, and little droplets just add a hint of sparkle and shine and interest to this card. And I'll have all the supplies linked in the description of this video on my Dahlhouse Designs YouTube channel and blog. I would love it if you give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you liked it. Plus, if you have any questions or a sweet comment, post below. Thank you so much for creating with me today. I hope you were inspired, and of course, I'll see you again soon for another video. Bye!